Okay, this might offend some people, but in my opinion, the person that has presented the gospel the best is not Jesus, it's not Paul, it's not any early church father or theologian, it's not even any Christian. In my opinion, the person that has presented the gospel the best is Ram Dass. And he did it in one saying, in one quote. And this is one of my favorite quotes of all time. And again, I think this really sums up the gospel better than any other saying or quote. And it goes like this: when you're already in Detroit, you don't have to take a bus to get there. And what he's talking about is God. What he's talking about is the true self. Now, from this perspective of non duality, God is not a presence. God is presence itself. God is not a being, but being itself. God is not something that exists. God is existence itself, because God is infinite. And by definition, if God is infinite, then there is no boundary line where we can draw and say, okay, this is God, this is not God. No, God is everything and nothing, as the mystics say. And so this includes you and I. This includes all of us. We are all God. Now, I'm not saying that I alone or you alone are God. That's not what I'm saying. And a lot of times when you take this non-dual approach of God into the West and you start talking like this, people will look at you like you're crazy, because they'll say, what do you mean you're God? You're not God. Are you out of your mind? And that's not what we're saying. That's not what Ram Dass or any mystic or sage is saying when they say, I am God or we are all God. Because the I that they are referring to is the I am. And if you think about it, this I am presence that I have, that you have, that we all have, is fundamentally one. There's only one I. There's only one I am. There's only one presence. There's only one beingness. And in this being, we live and move and have our being. So this is the mystical approach. But if God is infinite, again, then where can you go where God is not? Because as soon as you say, okay, God is not over here, or God is not that, then you've created a line, a boundary, and God is this, God is not that. God is here, but not there. And that's when the separation occurs. And then God becomes finite. But when you understand that God is infinite, and I think the best way to explain this is, and let me say this too, like when I say, that everything is God, or God is everything and nothing, like I'm not saying that, again, God alone is this microphone, or this coffee cup right here is God. I'm drinking God. This tea is God. This light, God is all these objects. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that all of matter, all of these objects, all of the forces in the universe at the deepest quantum level, it's just pure energy vibrating at different frequencies. And if we go beyond that, it's actually this infinite pure consciousness. And the energy it's eternal, it's infinite, so it's not like separate energies. It's fundamentally one. It's an infinite sea of pure energy, of pure consciousness, okay? And so we're living in this 3D material world, and we're experiencing life through this VR headset, through our five senses. And our five senses are telling us that look at all these objects, and they're real, and they're solid, and they're separate, and they're absolute, and this is reality. But it's not. And now quantum physics can show us this. Quantum physics can show us that these solid, like separate objects that we think are absolute, they're not actually that solid. And so this is, again, something that when we see this, we see that like this whole notion of everything is one is not just some like spiritual woo-woo saying. No, this is actually reality. This is something that quantum physics can show us, that at the deepest quantum level, everything, all of matter, all of the forces are arising from this infinite sea of pure consciousness, of pure nothingness. And that's why in Hermeticism, the first principle is mentalism. Everything is mind, everything is consciousness. So this infinite consciousness, which, by the way, I'm using this term consciousness synonymously with being or awareness or God. To me, God is not some kind of distant deity. I used to believe in that. I used to have this theology. I also have a bachelor's degree in Christian theology, so I studied this for many years, and that's how I viewed God. But when I started to directly experience God, and I experienced this reality of oneness beyond my body, beyond my mind, beyond my ego, then I knew from this direct experience that whatever I am experiencing is fundamentally one with me. It's not something separate from me. And I've told this story many times, but one of my first mystical experiences was when I just started meditating, and I was going through one of the most difficult seasons of my life. And I've noticed this has been a pattern for many of the mystics throughout the ages. They talk about how when they go through suffering, when they go through these really hard and challenging times, some mystics like St. John of the Cross, he's actually the one that came up with this, but he called it the dark night of the soul. So what this is basically a season where you're letting go of who you think you are and you're discovering who you really are. But there's like this in-between season where you're in the wilderness and it's really scary and you're stepping into the unknown. There's all this uncertainty, there's all this anxiety, and there's shadow work happening. And it's very challenging to navigate. And this can occur really at any point in your life. But for me, it happened when I was moving away from Christianity, from ministry, from that whole world of evangelicalism. And I was getting into mysticism. And I went through a lot in a short amount of time. And so it wasn't just that. There was also different factors that was causing that particular season of my life to be immensely challenging. But during this time, I'm going within and I'm just like letting go of everything that I've been holding on to, because that's at that point in my life, I didn't know what else to do. I was just like, I'm just going to let go of all these different ideas and concepts and theologies and philosophies because it's all confusing me. And the more I would let go, the more I would forgive. I had a lot of unforgiveness and bitterness within me, but the more I would release and let go, what I noticed was I was shifting out of my headspace into my heart space. My heart opened, and then all of a sudden, I experienced the presence of unconditional love, non-judgment, unconditional love. And I knew at that moment that whatever I'm experiencing right now, this is God. And again, it was something that was not separate from me. And I knew that. I knew I wasn't experiencing some kind of external outside force. I knew that I was one with this force. And what happened was it brought my awareness beyond my body, and it showed me that everything is one. Separation truly is an illusion. And this unconditional love, it was like there was different layers to it. And I'm sitting here trying to describe this experience, but ultimately all of my words, all of my ideas, all of my interpretations about it are going to fall short. Because what happens is when you have some kind of mystical experience like that, it's like the experience in and of itself is ineffable. It's beyond words. And so like by the time it gets to your mind and your mind is trying to like rationalize it and understand it, you've already lost it. So there's really no point in me. There's no point in me sitting here trying to explain exactly what happened and all these kind of things. But all I can say is, from what I can remember, the main takeaway was this infinite presence of unconditional love like I had never experienced before. And I knew that this was the truth of my being, and it took me beyond myself, my small self, my egoic self. And yeah, it changed my life forever. But after that experience, it was like I started to live from this completely different place of oneness instead of from separation consciousness. And I started to understand what all these different mystics and sages from the various traditions have been talking about for forever, for thousands of years, which is that we are all fundamentally one. And so if you can like see past all these things that appear to divide us, and you can understand that at the core, like the I am presence that I have, it's the same I am presence that you have. If you can see that, if you can understand that on a deep experiential level, it will immensely change the way you live. You will start to automatically be more kind, more compassionate, more loving, more caring, because it's this whole like teaching, it's this whole ancient wisdom of what you're doing to others, you are doing to yourself. And many of the different sages, like I said, have taught that in different ways and in different words, but it's essentially this reality of unity consciousness. And you're living from this place of love, of unconditional love. And it's amazing. It's beautiful. But here's the other thing, and going back to the mystical experience, after I had the first one, I had a few after that where I would like, for a moment, I would taste, I would get a glimpse of reality, of this oneness, this unity of being, this pure unconditional love, this infinite consciousness that I fundamentally am, beyond my body, beyond my mind, beyond my thoughts, beyond my feelings, beyond my emotions, beyond all of it. I would get a glimpse, and I'm getting chills right now. I'm getting goosebumps talking about it. And so this happened a few times, but then after that, like, I noticed that after these experiences, I was becoming a lot more present. And there would be times where I would just be like sitting in my backyard, like looking at the trees, watching birds, something very simple, I would just be sitting there. And the next thing I know, I would start crying. And I remember one time I was sitting on my back porch doing just that. And my wife, fiance at the time, was with me. And she was like, "Are you okay? Like, are you about to break up with me? Like, what's going on? Why are you crying?" Because we were just having a normal conversation, just talking. But then there was like a moment of silence. And that's when I started crying. And she was like, "What's going on?" She thought I was going to break up with her or something. And I was like, "I don't even know. I'm just like, I don't know why I'm crying." But then I realized afterwards that the reason I was just crying was because in that moment, I was totally absorbed in the present moment. And that was one of the first times I had been fully absorbed in the present moment. And I was seeing reality. I was experiencing reality, God, the divine, whatever you want to call it, directly, because that's actually how you experience reality or the ultimate or God. It's through being fully absorbed in the present moment. And it's when you're in your heart space. The heart is designed to experience reality directly in the present moment. But the headspace, the mind, the analytical thinking mind, is always focusing on the past or the future. It's never in the now. But I was just sitting there and I was totally in the now. And it was nothing spectacular. I wasn't having some kind of supernatural, mystical experience. No, I was just sitting there. I was just fully in the moment. And I started crying because I was like, this is beautiful. This is amazing. How have I been missing this? My whole perspective on life changed the moment I became present, and I realized that everything I've been searching for, the peace, the happiness, the joy, the fulfillment, the divine, all these things that I thought were outside of myself have actually been right here, right now, within me. And at the deepest level, this love that I've been seeking, it is me. And I can know this, I can directly experience it by just being. Because beingness is God. So that happened. And then the more I would become aware of what was going on in these moments, the more I could allow myself to be fully present. And then meditation was the practice. It still is the practice that I use to stay grounded, to stay present. And like I said, it's changed my life more than anything. But here's the thing about presence and beingness, okay? When you're fully absorbed in the present moment and you're experiencing the true self, capital T, capital S, this pure, infinite I amness that is fundamentally one with everyone and everything, when you're experiencing this, and by the way, let me say this too, the present moment, the eternal now, is synonymous with the I am. The I am is in the present tense. The I am is God, it's consciousness, it's awareness. So it's all the same thing. That's the incredible thing about it. So we talk about how separation is an illusion, right? There is no separation. Well, the same goes for like this reality of timelessness, the eternal. And when I say eternal, like I'm not talking about a time that starts that goes on forever and ever and ever. I'm talking about beyond time. So the present moment, the eternal now, is this infinite awareness from which all of matter, all of the forces in the universe are arising. Everything's happening in the now. The past and the future are simply mental constructs that the finite mind is using to interpret and understand this human experience. But it's not the ultimate. It's just an illusion, and it's how the finite mind works. But when you transcend the mind, you step into or you unveil the reality of timelessness, eternity, the eternal now. So there really is no separation on any level of existence, whether it's time or space. But anyway, what you'll notice here is the I am presence, the present moment, is how you can have this direct experience of God. And what happens is, or what happened to me on my journey was, after I had these amazing encounters and experiences and I was starting to live more present, I noticed that there would be times that I would drift away from the present moment and I would fall back into my old egoic ways, and I would get so frustrated and discouraged. And I was like, oh, am I losing something? Am I losing the divine presence? Because at the time I didn't really fully understand the non-dual awareness and God from this non-dual perspective. And so I didn't understand that when the times where I didn't feel God, it wasn't that God was leaving me. It was just that my awareness was drifting from the present moment. Because again, God is not a presence. God is presence itself. So when I would drift away from presence, from the present moment, and I would fall into these thought patterns and these old narratives and stories of the past, or whenever I would get sucked into anxiety or fear about the future, I would leave home. I would leave beingness. I would leave the present moment. Not really, not ultimately, but in my mind. The separation would occur in my mind, but it wasn't reality, okay? So that's actually what was going on. And what I noticed, what the beautiful thing about this mystical path, what I noticed was, whenever I would get lost in a thought and I would drift away from the present moment, I could instantly return to the present moment by simply being aware that this thought or this feeling or this emotion had distracted me or pulled me away, pulled my attention away. And the moment I would become aware, I was back in the here and now. And again, I never left the here and now, but my awareness drifted. And so the awareness just would bring me back and I would be home again. And I would feel that peace and that joy and that fulfillment and that divine presence that I fundamentally am, that we all are. And it was just this simple shift. It was this simple, and here's the thing, because you never leave home, because you never leave Detroit, as Ram Dass would say, you're already in Detroit. Why do you need a bus to get there? Because you're always there. Think about it. You're always right here. You're always here now. So it's really a matter of letting go of whatever it is that is leading us to believe that we're not here now. So it's the thoughts of the past or thoughts of the future. So by just letting go, by detaching, we're back in present moment awareness. Okay. So I started doing this, and then I started thinking about, I know I said Ram Dass, in my opinion, has presented the gospel better than anyone, but I do think that Jesus did share a story. He shared a parable one time, and you can interpret this however you want it, but the way I interpret it now through this lens of non-duality and presence and beingness, and God being presence, God being infinite being, has helped me to see what Jesus could have been pointing to. So it's the story of the prodigal son, right? And I think that, like I said, there's different ways you can interpret this. But anyway, the way I'm starting to see it now is it's like you've got the father in the story, and his two sons. And the Father would represent beingness. The Father would represent God or infinite consciousness, whatever, same thing. And then the Son that leaves home, he leaves the Father and takes his inheritance, and he goes off and he runs away, and he ends up, as the story goes, he ends up working for a farm or something, and he ends up being with the pigs, and he's in the hog slop, and he's not being fed, he's hungry, and he realizes that he never should have left home. And he's like, man, I made a big mistake. And in that moment, he decided to stop what he was doing, and he started to return home. And as he's returning home, he's like rehearsing what he's going to say to his father, because he knew, or he thought, that the father was going to be really upset and angry and maybe not even allow him to come back to the house. So he's walking back and he's rehearsing his lines, his speech of repentance or whatever. And as soon as the father sees him, like coming up the driveway, the father runs out there and embraces him and hugs him and welcomes him back, and then throws a party for him. So let's look at it like this. Let's say that the son that left is when we are drifting away from being. When we leave home, we leave the I am, and we get lost in some kind of thought. Maybe it's a narrative, an old egoic story about who we used to be or who we thought we were, and we fall back into a familiar pattern, and that takes us away from the reality, from the now. And then what happens is, it's like, we get so lost in that, and that can cause these emotions like depression and fear and anger to arise, and we're just caught up in that, and we're believing these lies, and it's like this cycle until we snap out of it, until we realize that, hey, we've been listening to this voice, this guidance that isn't true, and it's been bringing us away. It's this thought pattern, or the voice in the head, or whatever you want to call it, but we've been like lost in that. We've been taken away from the reality, from the awareness of what is. And now we just simply need to return back to presence, return back to beingness, beyond the different stories and narratives and thoughts and feelings and beliefs, and they said this and they said that, like letting all of that go and just returning to the now. As soon as that happens, all of a sudden you're back home. And that's what that story, I think, really points to and illustrates, that the return to beingness is unconditional. In other words, when you're lost, when you fall, when you make a mistake, when you get distracted and you start going down the old egoic paths again, like, it's not the end of the world. You're falling asleep. You're becoming unconscious when these things happen. And this is typically when we start to do things and say things that we end up regretting, right? Because we're living from the ego. We're living from this unconscious state of awareness. But the moment we just return, the moment we become aware of what's going on and see it for what it is, then all of a sudden we're back. There's that awareness. There's that understanding of, oh, the reason I did this, the reason I said that was because I wasn't in the present moment. I was living from some kind of emotion from the past, or some kind of emotion from the future, or a thought or a feeling or whatever it was. And this caused me to drift away. But I'm back here now. And what's beautiful, what's amazing about the ever-present moment is that every time we return to it, the moment's new. That's the paradox. The moment never changes, but the moment is always new. Every time you return back to the moment, there's this newness, there's this innocence, there's this liberation. Yeah. So every time we drift, we come back. And that's the dance of this. That's the dance of this life. That's the earth school that we're all participating in. Every time you drift away and then come back, you come back with knowledge. You come back with something that you learn that is causing your soul to evolve and grow beyond anything you could think or imagine. So that's why it's important to have self-compassion on this journey, because you will drift away from presence. You will drift away from the awareness of what is the divine presence, and you will get lost in your ego and do things that you'll regret and make mistakes and all the stuff. But the truth about it, and that's where I think Ram Dass does a better job of pointing to the reality of this, is because in the story, in the parable of the prodigal son, the deeper truth would be like the son actually never left home. So we could say maybe that him going off and going into the hog slop was like, that was almost like a dream he was having, we could say. And then he woke up and realized he was always, if the story would have been framed that way, I think that would have been a better illustration of what's actually going on, right? But it doesn't matter because it's a story. So it's not meant to be understood literally. It's supposed to be understood in a metaphorical way. And what's interesting is I think the whole point of the story is this unconditional return that always is. And this is where I think a lot of people might get offended, especially like fundamentalists, because it's like, there was no point in the story where the son was thinking about returning home, but then someone came up to him and said, hey, look, here's the deal. If you want to return home, your father's really pissed off. So he said that he has to sacrifice someone. He has to kill someone in order to accept you. That's not in the story, but that's the gospel we've been fed. That's the gospel we've been taught, that the Father, God, is a distant deity who is fundamentally separated from us, and the only way we can return to him, the only way we can have a relationship with him or experience him, and of course, it's a him, God's a him somehow, but the only way this can happen is if there's some kind of sacrifice. And as the story goes, Jesus was the sacrifice, so God had to shed blood in order to forgive all of humanity. And it's like, no, we don't find that in that story, in that parable. And I don't even interpret, I'm not a Christian anymore, but I don't even interpret the message of the cross in that way. I see it as a very important myth, and Joseph Campbell talks a lot about this, the myth of death and rebirth, and how this story, this myth has been told in many different traditions, in many different mythologies, time and time again, because it's pointing to this human experience and the reality of what's happening in nature. So that's how I interpret that whole, like, the cross and resurrection narrative, the death and rebirth. But I don't want to go there in this video, but maybe I'll talk more about that in another video. But today, I'm going back to the parable, the prodigal son. In this story, yeah, there's none of that. Like, there's no point in the story where there's some like mediator or some sacrifice that comes in and says, this must be done in order for you to return to God, in order for you to return to the Father. No, there's none of that. There's just this awareness of, oh, I've drifted away and this is not what I thought it was going to be, and I am lost, or at least I think I'm lost, and I'm going to return. And there's this unconditional forgiveness. There's this unconditional acceptance. There's this unconditional return to being, return to Father. And in that moment, that is the ultimate expression, the ultimate manifestation of unconditional love. So again, this is a parable. This is a story. This is a myth that is pointing to a deeper reality of the human experience, of this journey, of this evolution of the soul that each soul is experiencing. And the message is clear. The message is, as long as you're having this human experience, you will drift away from the reality, from the unity of being. You will drift away from presence. You will drift away from this inner knowing that you are God and everything else is God. And from this heightened state of awareness, from this bliss, from this peace, from this joy, you're going to drift away from it. But every time you drift away, it's not the end. And the moment you become aware again, you're back home. You wake up from the dream. You wake up from the nightmare. Think about it. It's like when you're having a nightmare at night. You're at home, you're sleeping in your bed, and you're having this dream, and it feels so real. It's very vivid, and all these different things are happening. And when you're in the dream, you don't realize you're dreaming. But the moment you wake up, the moment you become aware, you see that it was just a dream. The dream was an illusion. Separation is an illusion. You've always been home. You were in your bed the whole time. You just didn't see it. You just didn't realize it. But now, from the dream, this is the amazing thing about life and the evolution of the soul. In the dream, in the drifting, or in the appearance of drifting, you learn something. And now you know more about yourself. You know more about whatever the experience you're having, and the lessons to be learned, and the karmic insights and all of that stuff. So it's all grist for the mill. And another quote that Ram Dass has that I think is another beautiful way of summing up the gospel for more of a inclusive way, going beyond the ego, is he says, we're all just walking each other home. We're all just walking each other home. That's the whole point of the human experience, is to keep reminding each and every person we encounter that they're never too far away from home. In fact, they've never left home. And the way you walk someone back home is simply by bringing their awareness back to what is, back to beingness, back to the present moment. That's home. That's reality. It's always here now. The question is, where are you going to go where it's not here? There's nowhere you can go where it wouldn't be here. It wouldn't be the present moment. It wouldn't be the now. And if we can learn to live from the now, if we can learn to live from beingness, being home, I believe, because everything is consciousness, because everything is mind, mentalism, that from this vibrational frequency of being, instead of from doing and seeking and searching and trying to make all these things happen, from this place, from this reality of beingness, we will start to create a world that reflects this truth of peace and love and compassion and kindness. I think the outer world that we're experiencing will really start to reflect that on a collective level. And that's why this message is so important, and that's why it's the good news. It's the true gospel, in my opinion, and it's unconditional. So it's not a matter of you need to be saved, or God is separate from you and you need to believe all these different things in order for God to accept you and love you and forgive you. No, God is infinite, and that includes God's being, includes your being. Your being is God's being, because God is infinite being, pure being. There is no other being or anything outside of the infinite being. How can there be? If there's anything outside of the infinite being, then the infinite being is no longer infinite. So the divine presence is something that we fundamentally are. We forget it. We fall asleep. We have nightmares from time to time. That's fine. That's part of this human experience. That's part of what we signed up for. But you're going to wake up, and the good news is that everyone will eventually awaken, because we are all just walking each other home, as Ram Dass says. So I think that's it for today. If you found this video helpful, informative, or insightful, please leave a thumbs up at the bottom of the screen, and be sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.